I really needed this episode this week. Let me put a timestamp on this. It's the first day of December, about a week after our live event that we had up here in Noosa. And I recorded this conversation with Dr. Michael Archinal about a month ago, maybe even a bit longer. And I've kind of forgotten what we talked about. So here's why I needed to hear it again. I've been feeling a bit flat this week. Last week's conference was such a high, and the lead up to it, plus the week itself, was so far out of my comfort zone that I'm experiencing that inevitable cortisone withdrawal syndrome with an accompanying cocktail of emotions, including elation, overanalysis, moments of self-congratulation punctuated by bouts of excessive self-criticism, and all of this infused with a solid dose of good old exhaustion. If you think about that feeling you had after big exams at vet school, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. All of that preparation and anticipation, and then once the pressure's off, your body just goes, okay, stuff you, buddy. I'm taking a break, whether you like it or not. So I didn't really feel like editing or releasing anything this week. But man, am I glad I did it. Listening to Michael talk about his incredible choose-your-own-adventure kind of career that goes from lying curled up on the floor with just 4 sausages in the freezer to being in a place where he can have an impact on some really big picture problems. Learning how he makes decisions, how he deals with bad decisions, uses gratitude as a shield, and really seems to be having a lot of fun along the way has totally lifted me out of my funk. And I think it will inspire you too. It also reminded me yet again, and you'd think I wouldn't need any reminding after 81 podcast episodes, but it reminded me of the incredible community of people that we find ourselves in this profession. I had the same thoughts last week at our conference. I was sitting in a room with 35 of you after a spectacular lunch, looking at everyone around me, and I actually felt quite emotional. Now, I'll confess that the wine menu was really good, so I may have been a tad more emotional than normal, but I was watching Professor David Church and Prof. Jill Madison. These two really smart and accomplished, but really modest and kind people share their life's accumulated learning with so much passion and care to an audience of people who have sacrificed 20 hours of their very precious time to learn about the intricacies of a handful of unique diseases, just so that they can take better care of the 10 or maybe 20 patients that they'll probably see per year with those conditions. I also heard conversations about work and kids and money and hopes and dreams, plans, struggles, and some darkness. And I realized that at the heart of it, maybe we weren't getting together just to learn how to manage diabetes better or what to do with jaundiced cats. We were connecting. We were sharing our light to help chase away some of that darkness and to make things better for our patients, for ourselves, and for our community. So thank you for being part of this community. Okay, enough of my musings. Dr. Michael Archinal. Who is Dr. Michael Archinal? Michael's been a vet for over 35 years and is currently the Senior Director of 9 veterinary hospitals. He has postgraduate training in animal behavior, acupuncture, dermatology, and pharmacology. Michael also has an illustrious media career that includes 13 years as a weekly guest presenter on Channel 9's Mornings with Kerry Ann and Sonia Kruger, and 21 years as an ABC radio talkback host, as well as being a regular contributor on the national ABC radio afternoons. When he's not talking, he's writing, from a regular column in Dog's Life magazine to, more recently, his own book, Animal Wisdom, which has sold over 10,000 copies. But because Michael doesn't like being lazy, he also helped establish a remote indigenous dog health program in Utopia in the Northern Territory, where he still volunteers, and which saw him nominated as an Australian of the Year finalist for the ACT in 2016. And there's more, but I've talked enough, so I will let him tell you more about it. Please enjoy Dr. Michael Archinal. Thank you for joining us on the Vet File.
Good morning, Hugh.
Where are we going to start? So many wide things to talk about, Michael. You do so much. Should we start, though, with a question about bad decisions lead to good stories, and whether you agree with that statement? And if so, have you got any examples for us?
And I'm a big fan of listening to the podcast. You guys do a great job and contribute beautifully to the profession. But look, I don't think there's such a thing as a bad decision, right? So I don't agree with that statement at all. And I think it's a really important thing because I see both clinically and also in business that people get really paralysed by decision-making processes. And if they think that there's going to be short-term bad outcomes, it really hampers their ability to move forward. I'd rather make, 10 decisions and get 9 of them right and 1 of them wrong and just keep moving forward. So I think there's not bad decisions. I think there's only bad outcomes. You make the decision at the time with the relevant information you've got in the situation that you're in. And that's totally appropriate. And you just have to learn to respect, you in the moment.
I'd like that, but then how do you mentally and emotionally deal with those bad outcomes? Have you ever struggled with then looking back at a bad outcome and going, oh, I was such an idiot, I made the wrong decision.
Yeah, sure.
I could have, if I didn't, this could have happened.
Oh, look, if maybe, but we'd all be millionaires and, everything would be perfect, wouldn't it? As I said, you just got to learn from your mistakes, and you've got to be grown up enough to realise that we're just not perfect. And we're going to make mistakes all the time. But as long as you make 2 good decisions for 1 bad, at least you're moving forward, right? But really, this analysis of people not making a decision because they're just paralysed too, I think really stops people moving forward in their professional career.
Yeah, I can probably attest to that personally, is overthinking stuff and then not doing anything. It still happens to this day, really, where you think too much about things and you don't act.
Yeah, and that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah. So I'd love to find out about your story, Michael. You do so much, and even Googling you, it's a little bit of story there and a little bit of that there. How does one become the director of 9 clinics? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
Am I
right.
understanding that correctly? Does director mean owner, or like you own all of them, or part own some of them, or manage, or what? What does it actually look like?
Yeah, so we've got 9 hospitals, and I've got sensational business partners in these hospitals as well. So it's together. I own a joint ownership across these 9.
So how does that happen? How do we go from vet student to owner of 9 hospitals, or co-owner?
Yeah, you find yourself here, actually, as it turns out. And we're just talking about decision-making processes. Things and opportunities arise at certain times that you make decisions there and you end up in certain positions. But how did I get to 9? Well, we started off, I had a very big hospital. I was headhunted up to Canberra to work in a large vet hospital as a succession planning partner. I'd set up my own practice from scratch. I'd only been out 2 or 3 years, I think, down the south coast of New South Wales. And I was a student at this hospital. So that's a good little tip for any students listening to this, is if you want to work in a place, go and do your placement there. I ended up being headhunted up there, and then we saw the rise of the corporates coming. And we thought, gee whiz, we need to be a bit of a critical mass to be able to offer some sort of alternative, because I'd had the opportunity as well to go to the US and meet with the CEO and COO of Banfield and UK with Goddard's, and really got onto the inside of these guys. And I didn't want to head down that path, and I wanted to give the opportunity to other veterinarians that I've had as well. So a few opportunities came up, and there were some older gentlemen selling practices who also wanted to sell within the profession. And so very quickly we had a few hospitals on board, and I've got to say there's a huge difference between owning 1 hospital or 2 hospitals to then leveraging yourself across 9. Right? So the information and the skills you've got when you've got 1 or 2 absolutely won't serve you once you want to go past that, once you're leveraged really heavily. So then when we also had people approach us that wanted to go into business, and we'd kind of pulled up stops at about 5 hospitals. We said, look, that's enough. But then people said, I want to go into the industry. I don't know how. I don't have the IP. Can we do a joint venture with you and get on board? And so that's how we found ourselves at 9. And I don't regret any of it. We've got a great team, great partners, lovely people. We're all got the same philosophy.
So just to recap, so you started your own business a couple of years out of uni. You bought a practice or started from scratch?
No, I started from scratch. Naivety is great, isn't it? I left uni in 87 and then worked for a fella for a little while down in the Southern Highlands, and then went up to the country of northern New South Wales, large animal practice, and then about 3 years out, opened my own from scratch. I had an $8,000 overdraft, and at one stage I had spent $7,960, and I had 4 sausages in the fridge and a 6-month-old baby. I remember lying on the ground going, oh no, maybe my boss will take me back, But it was one of those Cortez moments, you burn the ships and you go, all right, away we go. And I think that served me really well, just that real sliding doors moment where I said, well, no, we're going to give this a red hot crack.
So with the four sausage stage, that was while you were owning, was it shortly after starting the practice and it hadn't picked up yet? Was that the motivator to work harder or?
Well,
How did that
work
work?
harder, work smarter. I'm a big student. My mum was worked in a library, and I'm a big reader. And so I thought, gee whiz, I don't have the skills here, and this is maybe why this practice isn't doing what it's meant to do. So I read, and it seemed to stick in a chord with the community, and away it went.
Standout books that you read at that? We'll get to books later, but I have to ask here. If you said you read, was there one or two books that made a massive difference to how you ran things or how you thought about things?
Yeah, sure. And we might get onto this a bit later too. But I've had the privilege of having a media career for quite some time, and I've met all these amazing people. And there's a guy called Robert Kiyosaki who produces the book called Rich Dad Poor Dad. Well, I got to have coffee with Robert and his wife for 2 hours in the green room, just personally. Wow.
Wow.
Just amazing, right? Well, that book, it just shows you that, well, to me, I grew up in a bit of a poor family. My dad died the day after I was born. There was 5 kids under 5. And so we were almost put in foster homes. And so I realised from an early age, I always worked since I was very, very young. And I realised from an early age that if it was going to be, it's up to me. Nobody owes me anything, right? And so when I read Robert Kiyosaki's book called Rich Dad Poor Dad, it really struck a chord with me. And I thought, wow, I really need to start to think about the bigger phases of business now that I actually have this practice that I'm trying to get off the ground. And that really struck a chord, that's for sure. The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, these are all older books. And I think books find you at a certain time you're at in your business life and help you at different stages.
So you had the practice. It obviously started working. You made some changes that turned it into a more successful business. And then you said you were headhunted to go and manage another hospital. Was this while owning this business, or did you sell that and then move along?
Look, I had to sell it because, finances were always a problem. So I sold the business and moved up to Canberra as a succession planning partner. So joined the practice straight away. It was 6 vets at the time, and by the time I left it 15 years later, it was 13 vets. Went fantastic. Just, this is the greatest profession there is, the veterinary science, right? I can tell you the reason why I know that is if you go to a dinner party, unless there's an astronaut who's actually landed on the moon, you're the most interesting person at the dinner party, right? Everybody wants to be a vet, and we know it's hard. It's really hard, but nothing comes easy. And if you really commit yourself to it, it really is the greatest profession. So I'm lucky. I've got the luxury of having these opinions, right? Because I got into the vet game when it was a different beast than it is now. And the pressures that put on us as individuals are way, way different. The phrase would often be uttered back early on, oh, well, at least you had a go, or you did your best, or, that's not what happens now. The expectations of clients are very, very different. So I joined in Canberra and on that, and then very fortunately got surrounded by I'm not very smart, right, in a clinical setting, and surrounded myself with very smart clinicians. And boy, oh boy, they were just brilliant, all with their memberships and UK diplomas. And, it was a fantastic heap of fun, good ride. And then we noticed the corporates coming, so I had to change my tack a little bit and stop being so clinically focused and get a bit more business focused.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that because I don't know what the timing of it is, but you've done a lot of clinical extra stuff as well. So the normal trajectory that I tend to see in people is the clinical years where you upskill and work on your clinical skills. And then very often that leads towards some sort of ownership or leadership role or something like that. And then that takes up more and more time. And it becomes more interesting to learn about people and management and finances. So that becomes the next stage. And often the clinical stuff then becomes secondary, or if not completely left behind. Seems to be the almost natural evolution. Whereas with you, there's a lot of extra study. You've got the acupuncture, you've got the dermatology, right?
Yeah.
There's pharmacology as well. It's a wide range of interesting things that I'd love to double click on at some point. Are those ongoing, those clinical interests, or are those in the past?
No, ongoing. You have to have relevance as a practice owner. And you have to know what's going on, because to make an appropriate decision, you really have to understand the systems and processes at work. And if you're not keeping up with what's going on medically and the trends within the clinical scenarios of practice, you're making bad decisions. Specifically those sort of things, though, the dermo I did because, as I said, I was surrounded by really smart people and everyone hated skin, right? And so I thought, well, why don't I do this? And, at least I can contribute somewhere. And like anything, the more you know, the more you enjoy it. And I just love doing dermo now. Acupuncture I did because I was a skeptic. There was a vet in Canberra who was an acupuncturist, and she'd left to go to Victoria. And we would refer cases to her, and she would get a lot of our back cases better. And so I was the biggest skeptic of all. So I went along and did my Chinese medicine degree. Animal behaviour, as I said, I've had a big media career, and 70% of the stuff you get asked has got to do with behaviour. So I thought I should know something about that rather than just give an uneducated opinion. So that's where it led me down that path as well.
It's interesting you say if you don't stay up to date clinically, you make bad decisions. Do you mean bad clinical decisions or bad business decisions?
No, bad business decisions. As I've said, I don't work much clinically now, and I've got, once again, always surround myself with very smart veterinarians, so I've always got someone I can fall back on. But it's business decisions, not knowing where the trends are, not knowing what the latest, what's out there. That's where you make your bad decisions.
I find that fascinating. That's very true, isn't it? If you say trends, do you mean trends, what are clients wanting, or?
Yeah, what clients want, what veterinarians want, what pieces of equipment that really will make a difference. They're not just a toy. They'll actually make a difference to the quality of the pets that are in your care. Conditions of your employees that I work with, what's out there in the industry, what are the expectations of staff. You really need still to be on the ground. And I think that's part of a problem and a mistake that's made when you get bigger practice groups, is that a lot of people step back, or they're not got an intimate knowledge of the veterinary industry. And this is back to your question about bad decisions. This is where bad outcomes are made. Decisions are made, and then the outcomes aren't as good as they could have been.
So how much clinical work are you doing, Michael?
Only a morning a week.
Do you spread yourself between the different businesses, or how do you devote enough attention to them all?
No, what we do is part of the ethos of our group is that we really want them all locally owned, locally run, have their own individual personality. And so I will fill in if needed, if there's a problem at other practices on short notice, but predominantly I manage one or two practices, and that's where I focus most of my time.
You still enjoy the clinical stuff?
Yeah, love it. Absolutely love it. I've got, as you go on in your professional career, you get the ability to realise when something's not right and recognise it really early on. And also you know what you don't know. And because you've got that luxury, you can say to the client, I don't know, or we're going to refer this. And clinical work becomes a lot more fun that way. You're not expected to know every answer every time.
Yeah, true, isn't it? It's almost like your expectations of yourself are lower, just in a weird way. You don't feel like it's a personal failure if you don't know. You just go, yeah, I just don't know, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. There's no ego anymore. Ego's long since left the building.
I like what you said, Michael, about I hate the derm. Everybody hates the derm, so I did that. I often think that about it as a strategy, even in terms of adding value as an employee to yourself, to your own pocket, is to look at the gaps in the business where you work in and say, well, what does everybody hate doing? And let me get really good at it, because it's often we hate it because we're not good at it. And as soon as you become the master of that thing and you're the person that people then say, hey, can you help me with this case? That it sort of gives you the confidence and you feel better about it. And then suddenly you're actually a more valuable employee as well. We can probably negotiate your salary better if you say, yeah, well, I turned 100,000 a year in derm. Pay me more.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got a special skill, no question. But it also translates to the business side as well. I hated numbers and accountants and balance sheets and P&Ls. And then I suddenly went, it's exactly the same philosophy. I suddenly went, well, that's a bit ridiculous. So then I went away and really learnt a lot about it. And now, I love it because I know a bit about it, and I get to talk about it. For some reason, the Tom Waits song, Big in Japan? You ever heard that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I lecture in Japan all the time. I've been there heaps and, 3 big all-country visits and do webinars for them. And so for some reason I resonate in Japan. But it's all about the business side. It's all about the numbers. And I really, really enjoy that. Spreadsheets and hot sheets and KPIs. And sounds very boring, but
Exactly. I'm listening to you going like that.
Blah, blah.
For some reason, those things, it's not even that I hate it, that I get like an anxiety. As soon as I sit down with a spreadsheet or something, I just start getting almost like a panic attack. Maybe I should take your strategy and learn about it. Why Japan? How did Japan happen? Is it to vets or to any businesses?
So, sorry, just before we leave that, the reason I really got involved in this was I thought if we're going to run a lot of practices, I've got the responsibility for 146 employees now, and I've got the responsibility to look after them and their families. So, I can't just be stupid about this. So how did Japan happen? I got the opportunity to be part of the launch of a heartworm product throughout Japan, and got over there, and it's all about respect in Japan. They're just such beautiful people. So I learned some of the language. I spent a while learning some Japanese, and also a lot about the Japanese culture. And so I got over there, and they were blown away that anyone would think enough of their country to have learned some of the language for this. And so they really took me to heart. And from the back of that, then a practice management group picked me up over there. And then from that, other groups picked me up. And, when you speak to 600 vets in one room, as I did in Osaka, there's always people there who, know people and think, oh, this guy would be good. So I was flavour of the month there for a little while. That was good fun.
There's a country that I know nothing about the vet profession. Is it a very
so
big profession? Is it a
So, I could talk about that for hours, but a couple of really, really interesting things that struck me was they don't actually have any specialist qualifications. So if you want to be, you can go off and do them, right? But to be called a specialist in Japan, you just need to be recognised by your peers that you're good at that, right? So if you want to be, and there was one guy who was a dermatologist, right? So he had just done lots and lots of study, and he was known as the dermatologist. And because they are really seriously all about respect, that guy was a really good dermatologist, even though he hadn't done his American boards, right? The other thing that really struck me was space is an issue, right, of course. So these practices were tiny, but the vast majority of them had not only a CT but also an MRI, because about 60 to 70% of dogs are under 5 kilo, and they're all fracturing their radiuses and ulnas and getting non-unions, and they all had heart disease. So these MRIs and CTs were running all day long. And these guys were phenomenal surgeons and just so highly qualified. It was really, real eye-opener as to how it was practiced over there.
So what can we learn from them? Did you learn stuff from Japan that you brought home to your businesses?
Yeah, of course. You come back very, very different. What I really liked was the fact that I realised that you don't have to practice veterinary science the way you think it's practiced. There are lots of other alternatives out there. So you don't have to be practices that just work, all day Sundays or open till 10 o'clock at night. You can choose your own path. There's lots of room in the marketplace for this. There's lots of work out there. You just got to choose how you want to do the work. It doesn't have to be cookie cutter.
So is that a more of an approach there, that it's more niche, or people do practice in different ways and different practices?
They've still got you mean in Japan?
Yeah. Yeah,
no, it's still very, very, the society, they're beautiful people. They work really, really hard, which, that's just, it's not the Australian, well, we work really, really hard here too, but Australian culture is very different. It wouldn't translate.
Tell me about the media career. How was that? Because of vet, or was it a media career before vet?
No, it was because of vet. That was really good fun. And I suppose I've been a vet 35 years. Not many people have a great longevity in their career, but I think I've been able to reinvent myself a lot of times. So I get very passionate about things and get bored as well. So there was a show on telly called Animal Hospital, and they were looking for a new presenter, and we had I mentioned to you, I had a really big practice at the time. So they came down. They used to come down to sit in the waiting room and film for the day. And then they wanted a new presenter. And so they got 5 people they liked on camera to do screen tests. And I got the job. And lo and behold, they decided not to go back into production. But what I did, and I wrote a letter to the producer and all the people who I knew from this show that was now defunct, thanked them very much. Really followed up quite heavily. And, 18 months down the track, one of those producers was working on another show. It was a lifestyle show on Channel 9 in the morning, and said, oh, I know a vet. So they contacted me, and it was a lady called Kerry Ann Kennelly. And for 10 years, I was on that show every week doing a pet segment. And that's where I got to meet amazing people and just had the most amazing time and heaps of fun. That was really good. Wouldn't do it for a living, but, as an aside, they used to fly me up, first flight out of Canberra in the morning at 6:15, and then I was on the plane home, coming home after lunch. It was pretty whirlwind.
Seriously?
Yeah, really.
Well, why you say you wouldn't do it for a living? Why not? What's the downside?
Oh, it's really cutthroat.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Great people on, just solid human beings. But, yeah, vets are really different. They've done so many studies on personality profiles of vets. We don't match anyone else. And you look at all these other industries and they're just not for me. I went to a seminar once. There was a guy who climbed Mount Everest quite a few times. And now what he does is just do corporate events and talks to people about his experiences. He does this scenario and he gets everyone in the audience to be part of it and have to make decisions about what's going on. And it was a real life scenario where there was people stuck on Mount Everest and other groups stuck somewhere else. And he would propose these questions. And in one of them was that there was this potentially a group who was stuck on another side of Everest, but no one was really sure. And that would mean you'd have to cut your trip off, not go, just in case there was some other people, right? And you go and save them. The only group of anybody he has spoken to worldwide who were empathetic enough to go and do that were veterinarians. So, so we really are different, right? And that's why, everything really affects us quite heavily. You don't think so, but we really are different human beings. And I think, and they're the people who stay in the profession and the people who I think tend to leave the profession, it's just too tough because that's what it is. That's the territory we're in.
So is the differentiator, because I often think that vets are different, but then I'm wary to not just, because I'm part of that group and everybody thinks they're special, right? That my story is different and special to everybody else. So I worry that sometimes we make too much of how we are unique. But then speaking to other business people and people who try to, like I've done marketing courses and business courses, and often there will be this thing, it's the vets are different. Vets are they're harder to market to. They have their own unique traits. So you mentioned empathy. Is that the key differentiator, or what are the other differentiators?
I think empathy is huge, and I think that's part of our downfall as well. Gordon Parker, who wrote this sensational book called Burnout.
Yeah, we had him on the podcast.
Everyone should get that book. He talks a lot about that, and I think he's really hit the nail on the head. That's why we do struggle with mental health issues in our profession because of that.
So what's the secret to maintaining the long career if we are mostly these deeply empathetic people? Empathetic, I always say empathetic people. How do you stick it out? What are the strategies?
That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? So many smarter people than I have tried to answer that. For me, in my career, he talked about electronic medical records. Well, I started before they were a thing, so that the scrutiny just wasn't there, And as I said, I was never the smartest vet in the block. In fact, if you're the smartest person in the room, you should go to another room. So I don't know. What's the answer? I don't have it for you. I go to a happy place. I know my triggers. I'm pretty self-aware. I do a lot of mindfulness things. And when I say mindfulness, for me, it's not colouring in or jigsaw puzzles. I go bouldering, and you've got to be very mindful there. I play a lot of golf, and you're really in the moment. So those sorts of things protect me from the exposure that I openly give to my clients at work. I was just going to say one last thing. I practice with an eternal sense of gratitude. So I'm super thankful. It was funny, I took over this practice. I thank all my staff when I go to work for coming, and then I thank them when I go home. And I took over this one practice, and I thanked this nurse. I said, thanks so much for your work today. And she said, what are you thanking me for? She said, you pay me. But eternal sense of gratitude. I'm thankful that the clients come in. Yeah, and I think that paradigm really helps.
I keep seeing this pop up everywhere is the saying of not I have to, I get to. So when you have to do something that might seem hard to say, the negative way of looking at it is, I have to do this thing, versus reframing and saying, I get to do this thing.
Fantastic. It's all the self-talk. 75% of the thoughts we had today are exactly the same thoughts we had yesterday. Right? So you may as well get your self-talk right.
So the empathy thing, I'm on this tangent on reading and trying to find out more about empathy. I don't have an answer, but I have a good question. I think that could potentially help us find the answer. So I discovered this book by a psychologist called Paul Bloom. The book's called Against Empathy. And the premise in the book is that empathy is not a great driver for decision making. And the theory behind it. So if we dig deep into the definitions, and it is getting a bit semantic, but there's differences. So empathy, per his definition, is an emotional response where we feel the feelings of the other people. So I feel my patient's pain, or the client that's upset about losing their pet. I feel it. And they do functional MRI studies where when they scan people feeling empathy, they show them videos of other people getting hurt and stuff like that. And you literally get the same areas of your brain light up as the person in pain. And that is a negative emotion. It wears you down. Whereas when they look at compassion, which they describe as, I can understand what you're going through, but I'm not actually feeling what you're going through. So you need that to be able to be a good vet, because I do feel very strongly what I used to call empathy is essential for being happy as a veterinarian. If you lose it, then, well, there's no point doing the work we do. But he says we should shift to compassion, which is I understand and I get what you're going through, but I'm not feeling it. I'm not sharing your pain. But that understanding drives me to want to act. So whereas empathy can be a disabling emotion of I'm so hurt and emotional that I actually can't do anything, whereas I get it and I want to do something and I want to help you. And that's compassion. And that is actually a very positive emotion that keeps you going, which is a really cool idea.
Okay, so therefore, you've got that knowledge with you now. Do you want to ditch being empathetic and just become compassionate?
I'd encourage you to read the book, because lots of people argue with him vehemently saying, no, you can't ditch empathy. According to the book, we have to. I'm not sure about it yet, but he says because that empathy can make you make bad decisions as well, because you're making an emotional decision. It's not a rational decision. So A, it weighs you down, and B, it actually affects your, in terms of bigger decision making. Sometimes let's say there's a scenario of a single animal or a single child or somebody who's suffering versus a global scenario with 100 children starving somewhere. But the one in front of you, the one that you can see, gets that massive empathetic emotional response going, which might drive you to make a decision to favor this one. And there's research supporting this, saying that people will make really nonsensical, non-rational decisions based on strong emotional, empathetic responses. So according to him, yes, we have to ditch empathy in exchange for compassion. But I'm not saying it's the how is, I don't know how do you do that? How do you make that shift? How do you stop it from actually wearing you down and turn it into a positive emotion? Yeah, so I'm not sure about the theory. I'm still working on it. I'm still trying to read about it. And that also raises the question, if compassion is such a positive emotion and drives you to take action and do good things, where does that leave us with compassion fatigue? Is there such a thing? Are we actually just fatigued? We feel compassion, so we drive, and we actually just get physically fatigued.
You can get caught up in definition, can't you?
Yeah. Anyway, that's my little side stream there. Michael, with all the stuff you do, are you still doing the media stuff now, or is that a past thing?
Everything has its life cycle. And I got to write a book. And what happened on the back of that, because that was because of my TV exposure, then a company contacted me to write a book on the human-animal bond. And because of that, I got a heap of media work. You get legitimacy as soon as you got a book. Doesn't matter if it's good, bad, or indifferent, right? And it sold 10,500 copies. It went really well. But I kind of got bored with the media stuff, you know, as I said, it has its run. It had heaps of fun. So I do bits and, here and there, stuff that I want to do. But yeah.
So the book, Animal Wisdom, that's about the human-animal bond.
Yeah, correct. Correct.
That's the basic theme of the book.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, in your own words, how do you define that human-animal bond? What is it?
Yeah, look, it's a hard one. I mean, there's classic definitions about a mutually beneficial relationship. But I always say to people, it's a little bit like a beautiful piece of art or music. It's really hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. And so in the vet game, that translates to, the unbelievable, you just see it in front of you every day, the bond between the person and the animal. Or it might be the science behind the fact that autistic kids do better in a classroom with, guinea pigs up the back, or how you see people have the same medical condition as their pet. the dropping blood pressure. It goes on. And it's all that sort of stuff that was just coming across the consult table day in, day out. So when Pam McMillan said, we want you to write a book, what do you want to write it on? It was the science behind the human-animal bond. And it's going to take about, animals going into hospitals, all that sort of stuff. It's going to take about 10 years before we have a bit of a societal shift on Australia to really embrace the benefits that pets bring to society even more. But it's getting there.
So why was that your choice of book? Is it just because you saw it? Like, what was your trigger to go, well, I want to find out more about this and I want to talk about it to the world? Because you also do talks on it. It's your thing, it's your soapbox.
Yeah, one of them, man. I've got a heap of them.
What was the driver? Why did you decide to talk about this topic? Why is it important to get it out to the world?
Well, I looked at it from the outside too. What can't I write about? As I said, I'm not really that smart and cluey, so it narrowed the field up a bit. But it was just the stuff that came across the desk all the time. And I got to go to the US quite a bit once again on some fantastic trips to meet fantastic people. But I'd go to all the anthrozoology conferences and see this science being produced. And I thought, people need to know about this. It's not mainstream, and yet it's life-changing. So I thought this was a great vehicle to do it. Just, incredible stuff. And in fact, there was one tipping point, one story that a mate of mine who was the surgeon at Sydney University a few decades ago, and he's a pretty smart guy. Surgeons, you know what they're like, right? Fact. So he was in a consult room one day. He worked this cat up, and there's husband and wife there, and he says to them, oh, look, I've got bad news. The cat's got this tumour on its spleen and it's called a blah, 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 right? So, it's not looking good. And the lady faints in the consult room, right? And so my mate goes, oh, that's not good. Everyone comes back to earth, and they said, look, we've got to tell you the story. He said, my wife was diagnosed with that exact same cancer. So a really rare one, right? My wife was diagnosed with that exact same cancer 6 months ago. And the cat used to come and sit on her belly, and she used to pat the cat and say, the healer will make it well. The healer will make it well, right? This is all woo-woo stuff. And then suddenly she goes back for MRIs and CTs. There's no detectable cancer in her body. And now the cat's got it. And so they then spent the next half hour having an ethical decision about what they would do. Would they treat the cancer in the cat or not? But look, it's one of those stories. And as I said, this is a surgeon at Sydney University, so it's not, it's anecdotal, but it comes from a very reliable source. So that sort of stuff, when you hear that, you think, man, people need to know about this. This is really cool. This is why we're good dinner companions, right? Around the dinner table.
Yeah. Yeah, well, especially with your research. So were there other things that you've discovered in your research about this that just blew your mind or changed the way you interact when you're at work?
The things like when pets know when their owners are coming home. Mm-hmm. They've done all those studies where, the dog lives half an hour away from the office and the person picks their keys up in the office and the dog goes to the front door in anticipation of the owner coming home. Or, there was one great case with a horse where this girl used to go and visit her horse half an hour away, drive that way, and the horse always knew, and it would go to the corner of the paddock anticipating the owner, right? And then one day it went to the other corner of the paddock, and the people where it was being adjusted thought, what's going on here? Well, that day the owner decided to catch a train to the station and walk to the paddocks instead of drive a car. So she entered the paddocks and, that sort of stuff. It's like, man, we know so little,
Wow. It's a big time commitment to write a book, though. When you run all these businesses, you've got all these other things you do. How do you decide where to devote your energy?
I live my life by the Pareto principle. You heard of that? The 80-20 principle?
Okay, yeah.
Oh, wow. Yeah, 80-20 principle, right? So I find the 20% of stuff that's going to make 80% of difference. Sorry, for people who don't know what that is, the 80-20 principle, this guy Pareto back in Italy centuries ago realised that 80% of the wealth was held by 20% of the people. And 80% of crime is committed by 20% of criminals. And it goes on and on. I was at a seminar once with Sam Bowden and he got people up and it turned out in the seminar, 80% of the shoes were owned by 20% of the people. Right? Some people had like 80 pairs, So, and I ran that on my client base, on my database. And it wasn't quite 80-20, but 30% of my clients gave me 70% of my income. So what I do is I laser focus that 20%. I spend a lot of time working out what that 20% is of a topic, and I just laser in on that. And so I managed to do a lot more stuff with my time because of the 80-20 principle. You know, we're talking about decisions again. I make stacks of decisions, right? Stacks and stacks and stacks. I get a lot of them wrong, but I get most of them right. So I laser focus that 20%.
So when you're making those analyses to see what's going to be the biggest impact or where you should focus, what are your metrics? What are you hoping to, and I'm asking for personal reasons because I struggle a lot with still trying to allocate time on all these interesting things that are out there and all these opportunities popping up, deciding what are you hoping to achieve with that laser focus?
Well, obviously it depends on each scenario, doesn't it? You know, it's like clinical work. I could do a lot more clinical work, but I wouldn't have the leverage of being able to help my vets currently. I'm much better off stepping back and leveraging myself so I can help them with case management or whatever and releasing them. That's just a specific example. You know, as I said, I play a lot of golf and, you know, I focus on the 20% of my game that's going to make 80% of difference. And you just got to realize that and be comfortable with it and just go, I can't be all things to all people. I can't do all things all the time. I can only do this bit, but gee whiz, I'm going to do it well.
I skipped over a question I wanted to ask when we were talking about the human-animal interaction and the bond. You said earlier when we talked about it, about a societal shift that will take about 10 years to happen. Is it happening though? You've been a vet long enough, have you noticed a big shift in that human-animal bond interaction?
Classic phrase is that dogs have gone from the backyard to the bedroom. You know, you now ask clients not, does your dog sleep in the bedroom, but are they under the covers? That's the extent of it, isn't it? You know, so
does it ever happen that you get out of bed and go sleep on the couch so that you don't feel comfortable?
Yeah, it's just a mess. And we've seen it in, you know, when I started in rural practice, I remember a case once where a fella came in, he said, if it costs more than $100 to fix this dog, don't bother. And the estimate was $105. And literally the guy said, don't bother. Right. And now we've got pet health insurance and MRIs and, yeah, major change. For the better for both, right?
For the better, yeah. And same thing. I've been doing it long enough. And I also had the shift from South Africa to the UK to Australia. And I feel like I don't know if it is. Maybe if I go back to South Africa, it'll be different. But I feel like there it was more if it's going to be more than X, then don't bother. That sort of approach. Definitely for the better because you get to do better work and we get to do the thing that we trained for, want to do. But do you find that it adds more pressure as well in terms of expectations on us? Is there a negative side to it?
Sure. Remember I mentioned earlier in the discussion that, you know, I certainly was greeted by the phrase many times early in my career of, well, at least you had a go. You know, you did your best. But now, you know, we can't keep up with the level of medical knowledge that we're expected to know. And I'll go back to the 80-20 principle. I'm competent at dermatology and I'm not great at cruciate surgery, so I get someone else to do that. So I can only do what I can do, but I do it really, really well. So I think we just need to, and you've seen it in specialisation in the vet field. You know, there used to just be orthopaedic surgeons and ophthalmologists came along, and now we've got oncologists, and the list goes on and on and on. You just got to know what you can do and what you can't do, and what you can do it really well. And don't try and know everything. You just can't. But the identification of what's abnormal and what's normal, that's a really important thing.
And does that just come with time?
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. Or with good mentoring, you know. I was on an SBS TV show about the mental health crisis in the vet industry. And one of the vets there was an equine vet. And she'd been through horrible stuff. Well, she now works with me as a small animal vet. And so I'm able to be there and she'll, you know, just say, oh, what do you think about this? And I'll go, yeah, we need to, that one's in trouble, or no, that's all right, it's going to be okay. But that ability to discern only comes really with quantity time in the profession.
I think that's often a big stressor when you start, is you lack that. It is almost like a sixth sense, and it's not a sixth sense. I found it interesting learning about how your mind works. It's subconscious signals that you pick up, and you talk about mentoring. Sometimes it's hard to explain how do you know this thing that you know? You know, it's that I just know it's going to be okay. Yeah, but how do you know? I don't know. It's just I could tell. I saw it when it walked in the door that it's, or on the flip side, when they walk in the door and you immediately go, oh shit.
Have you ever read a book called Blink by Malcolm Gladwell?
Yeah.
Well, that's exactly
Great.
what he talks about in that book, Blink. It's just that bang moment.
Tell me about dog dreaming.
Wow.
What's dog dreaming?
Wow, that's a great question. You want to talk about our work in remote Indigenous communities?
Yeah, but when I read about your work there, the phrase you said that where you guys are working in Utopia.
Oh, it's on the back end of
a
Dog
country
Dreaming
where,
Country, Ali Karang. Yeah.
yeah,
So the Dog
yeah.
Dreaming story is that there's a hole in the earth up in the Northern Territory where the dogs emerged out, right? And so that's specifically Dog Dreaming Country, right? So we, quite a few years ago now, gosh, it'd be 10, 15 years ago, my business partner, Alison and Bill Taylor, and I, there was a need to provide services to remote Indigenous communities. So the people up there couldn't access veterinary services for various reasons. Where we go, English is not their main language. It's second or third. They're very remote. It's 350 k's northeast of Alice Springs, dirt roads. So we went up there. We got invited up by the traditional owners of the land via the health clinic to go up and help them because the dog population control was out of just insane. We went up there, started a desexing program and treating for internal and external parasites. And it just went gangbusters, went fantastic. So much so, the impact on the human health, regardless of the animal health, was so significant that we got nominated as ACT finalists for Australian of the Year. I mean, it really,
Wow.
yeah, it's insane the difference. So we go to 32 communities now, and it's all volunteer basis. It's our staff. We take a team of about 7 or 8 people up there for about a week. Got a storage unit in Alice Springs with our anaesthetic machines, and we head off into the desert and come back a week later with 1,000 stories and big smiles on our face.
But let's get back to dog dreaming. So we've got a lot of non-Australian listeners. Can you tell us about the dreaming things in general? Explain for people who don't know what that's about.
Yeah, and I'm going to fall back into a real local people sort of speak in that it's not my story, so it's hard to tell. And that's the nature of the people.
So it's just the cultural way of telling stories about the world and
and how it all interacts with each other in creation and where everyone sits and who has to look after what and who has to manage what and how they all interact. And it's so complicated. It's when we go up there, we say it's not like going to another country. It's like going to another planet.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, you have to come one day, mate.
I'd love to. Yeah, so I've talked about it before. Just pre-COVID, started getting involved in similar work in Indonesia, in Lombok specifically.
Great.
And again, that ignorance of going, you could just walk into a village and start working. Because my impression there was that most of the dogs are unowned and kind of a pest. I thought, and I was told, that they didn't particularly like the dogs and we could just go in and start work. And it was not the case. We got chased out of a village one day. They really valued those dogs. They just didn't value them the same way as us. They don't sleep on the beds, but they still a very valued, important part of the community. So there's some good lessons there.
Yeah, totally. And every dog is owned by someone. And they've replicated this in Johannesburg as well. Like all around the world, in lots of these places, they've shown that where dog population is a problem, it's very similar. They've all got names. They're all owned. Everyone knows who's who. But they may culturally interact with them on a different level. And that's what you see when you go into these communities. They think we're crazy, by the way. The Aboriginal people up where we go think what we do with dogs is insane, that we leave them in a house and we go out to work for 10 hours and then come home and expect the animal to be fine. Whereas up there, they're just roaming free in a pack of 30 dogs outside, with life happening. And they look at us and go, you do what?
I had those same thoughts in Lombok, because your first instinct when you drive around there and you see suffering in some of those dogs because they don't have the same level of care. So when they become unwell or sick, or when there's too many of them and you have puppies dying of hunger, it's confronting and painful to see as a Westerner. But then the other dogs, the ones that are healthy and strong, and they have the best lives. They run around in a pack fighting and shagging all day, just doing things that dogs love doing. So I often look at them and go, yeah, these are real dogs. They live the life for sure. It's just when things go wrong, then it really goes wrong for you if you're out there. And maybe, has this helped you at all in your interactions back home? Because sometimes we are faced with clients, very often actually, who value their pets differently than us as vets. Because I think we forget as vets that we are so animal focused. It is literally the center of our world. And then you get a client who doesn't want to spend the money or doesn't want to do this. I find lots of people get really upset by that. Like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to spend $5,000 on your dog?
No, look, that sort of attitude really comes from being in the profession a long time, I think, more specifically than just being exposed to what's happening in the outback. You can just never judge people. You don't know what's going on in their lives. And as long as they're respectful, then the decisions they make, you've just got to respect that decision. But the things you do learn coming back from places like working in the outback is, I talked about gratitude. Boy, oh boy. We just won the lottery living in Australia. Living on where we do, it's just the greatest place in the world. And the other skills you pick up, though, is you learn how to deal with what they call cheeky dogs. They're not cheeky. These things.
Cheeky.
That's what they call them, cheeky dogs. Boy, oh boy, when you got to we had to wrestle some dingoes at one stage, and these are wild, savage dogs. So you come back and the cavoodle's there, and you got to clip its nail. That's enough. Right, bring it on.
When the chihuahua tries to bite you, you laugh at it and go, "You've got nothing, mate. You don't know." So how do you practically do it? How do you handle the cheeky dogs up there?
They always want you to bring a blowgun. It's like, man, where would that suddenly come from? Blow darts. How do you deal with it? What's really cool is the way they handle their dogs up there are really different. So if you can get one of the locals they literally just put their hand on the dog. So dogs don't have collars or anything. There's no fences, no nothing, right? The dog will just stand there, dead still. Won't do a thing. It's this bizarre thing. And then you use a 25 gauge needle and a little bit of sedative, well, a lot of sedative. Give them a subcutaneous injection, and then you watch them like a hawk for the next 5 minutes while they calm down. Sometimes the local people will put them in the vehicle for us, but usually you've got to wait until they're sedated, and then we drive them back to a central area that we have set up as a makeshift operating theatre.
So what, when they have the hands on them, they won't turn and snap?
Yeah, not usually. Usually great. And once again, it's this real quantum physicsy thing about relationships with animals is they kind of know if we're experienced and we're not going to hurt them, they trust you a little bit. And so it's enough to get a 25 gauge needle in. You can't pick them up. They just go crazy, right? You can get a 25 gauge needle in.
Those Lombok dogs, they fascinate me. I think they're almost a different species. They are so wild. And it's weird. If you drive around the town on a scooter or something, they're not worried about you at all. As soon as you walk around just looking at them, you just literally just look at them and they're like, something's up, gone. So there we have to dart them. We use the blow darts there. It's the only way you can't get near them, and they will attack if you're trying to hold them. So it's a good fun. I'll pick that up. I'll take you to Lombok if you take me out. We can do some dog work. Michael, there's a topic that I've said I'd love to talk to you about, just because of all the things you do and teams that you manage and all these different situations, is difficult conversations. We touched on clients who have different values to you and don't always want to follow your recommendations. And then specifically conversations with coworkers as well, when there's a disagreement, or as an owner and manager, giving feedback that's not always nice feedback. Whether you've learned something over the years, how you approach this in a way that gives you the best outcomes.
A good mate of mine said, you get the staff that you deserve. And if you don't make hard decisions, then it's your fault. And if people aren't fulfilling your expectations, you haven't been clear enough about what you're expecting from them. So you've got to take a lot of the responsibility upon yourself initially. And when that is open then on the table for people to see, runs like this. So I'll do a staff review. And if there are things there that I'm not happy with, I usually find that if they're not doing what we want them to do, they're not happy in their job. And so my opening gambit in staff reviews is, hey, Mary, you're not happy. What's going on? And get them to talk. If you get a buy-in by the staff, you'll get an 85% compliance rate. Whereas if you tell them from the top, Mary, you're not answering the phone properly, Mary, you're rude to the clients, you get a 35% change in attitude. So it's critical And it's almost not worth doing unless you get buy-in from the staff member. And you have to help the staff member realise that they're not happy and realise why they're not happy. And then we have to coach them to resolve those situations. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. How do you get that buy-in?
By helping them realise that what the issues are. So helping them realise that they're not happy. Like, I've only ever sacked 2 people. One was from gross misconduct and the other was just a lady who was just a bad cultural fit. All the other staff that I've helped moved on. But people know you're genuine. They have to trust you in the staff. They have to know that you've actually got their best intentions at heart. And so you have to develop a high level of trust with your staff first to be able to operate on that level. They have to see that in you. You have to live out your life in such a manner that they respect that, and then they'll take that on board. Whereas if they see you as a bit of a fraud, they're not going to listen to a word you say.
Trust is I feel like that's one of the key things with all these sort of conversations, whether it's with staff or if you're not officially in a leadership position with your coworkers and then clients as well. I find that's one of the huge things, especially in emergency work, is really quickly gaining trust with the client so that they get that buy-in. Have you figured out ways to make that happen quickly? Specifically talking clients now. Like, how do you get a client to trust you with the life of their pet and their wallets in a 10-minute consult?
They've got to be heard. You've got to let them tell you, right? You've got to listen. And classic GPs take 8 seconds in a consultation before they'll interrupt the patient. So we need to just listen. And then you've got to find that 20% that's really important to the client, right? The 80-20 rule. And that 20% is going to make all the difference. So, they'll come in with an issue and you almost need to find the reason behind the reason. And it's fortunate for me. I mean, I've been a vet 35 years and I've got silver hair, so they come in immediately. My physicality is such that they go, okay, great. You've done this for a while. You must know what you're talking about. I don't say too much. I just listen a lot and say, okay, look, these are the issues and this is what we need to do. I don't offer people choices. I think that's a mistake. We can do A, B, C, we can do X, Y, Z. I say your dog needs, and I use the word need, So what we need to do here, and I'll tell them why, in your case, we need to do cytology so I can tell you what's in there and so I can give you the most appropriate treatment. We need to take some blood work because otherwise we're just guessing, aren't we? Because otherwise you confuse the client. They come to you because you're the expert. Even if you're a new grad, you know way more than they do, right? So they're paying you good money. They want your opinion, not, some wishy-washy thing. Just make, this is back to the decision-making thing again, right? I keep hammering that. It's not a bad decision. You're just going to make one. Right?
Yeah, I hear that quite often is, well, it's up to the client. They have to make the decision when we guide them in what we want to do. And I'm with you. I don't think that's fair on the client. At some point, they've got to make a decision, but they don't really have the deeper background knowledge to make those decisions. It's like I always say, when I take my car to the mechanic, I just want them to tell me what I need to do. I don't want them to say, well, and we can do this, or if you want to, we can check the filter because, well, I don't know. I don't understand cars. This is your job. Tell me what to do.
No, people are time poor. Yeah. By the time they've come to you, they've Googled it. They've come to you because they want to know what you know and what your advice is.
I just want to skip back a step. You said you apply the 80-20 rule with gaining trust, finding the 20% that matters to the client. So can you give me an example? Like what do you mean?
So a dog comes in and you look at it and it's really itchy and, hardly any skin on it. And the owner comes in and says, I brought it in because the dog, sleeps in the bed and it stinks. So I'll focus on the malassezia dermatitis it's got, right? Even though the poor bugger has got duck-ops or it's scratching all over the place, that will come. But I'll address the problem that the client has brought the dog in for, and I'll pay respect to that. But at the same time, I'll couch it in the bigger picture saying, okay, we're going to do that, but we need to do this as well. So just finding out why have they actually come to see me, There's a classic case where we were the third or fourth opinion on this case, and this dog it was a standard poodle, had one of those adenoma things on its face. And the previous vets had all said, don't worry about it, it's just cosmetic, leave it alone, right? So I listened to this client And her father had recently died of a facial tumour. So every time she saw this benign adenoma, she was catapulted back to the emotions of losing her father, right? Now, without listening to this client and finding out what the driver for her for coming into the practice was, I would have been as guilty as the other three. But I said, yeah, I understand what's going on. Yes, it's cosmetic, but I understand the scenario here. And this was affecting the human-animal bond. And I said, yeah, I have no problem at all in rectifying this.
I want to ask you, I'm personally just very curious about the acupuncture thing. On the clinical podcast a while ago, we spoke to an acupuncturist as well. And I'm like exactly like you. I'm learning more and more or hearing really positive things about it, but skeptic because of my sciencey background. It can be hard to. So are you non-skeptical? Are you using it in daily practice? And if so, how are you using it?
So acupuncture, if I was to advertise the fact that I'm an acupuncturist, I'd be full-time. The perceived need in clients, it's huge. But I use it as a Western trained veterinarian. And so I use it as an adjunct therapy like I would nutraceuticals in osteoarthritis, and I'll put it in my multimodal treatment plan. But I rarely use it as a main modality. There are better things to treat animals with than acupuncture for lots of conditions. And that's how I use it. Am I still a skeptic? No, I've seen it work. I've seen animals come in lame and go out not lame and all that sort of stuff. But, it's not the panacea, right, at all. Why do you think Western medicine was developed, right?
Because there was a need for it.
Right, that's right.
Yeah. Mainly for pain, for arthritis and things like that? Are there things that you're using it for that's not in that basket?
One thing it works really, really well with is fecal incontinence, which is interesting. Yeah. Those dogs that have that issue, it's fantastic. Anyway, but I use it mainly for osteoarthritis, right? For dogs, for some other, as a multimodal approach and needing quite a bit, that would be absolutely 95%. And then if somebody comes in wanting acupuncture specifically for some specific condition, I'll see whether I think it's an appropriate thing or not. I mean, it's well recognised that it works appallingly in dermatology, So there are times when I'll say to people, and, this isn't what you need. What you actually need are x-rays, right, to diagnose what your dog's problem is. I think it works well in our modern clinical setting that way. It gives me a different approach. I get lots of people coming in with different things like CBD oil, they want to know all about it. And so it interests me to keep up with what are the trends out there in the alternative therapy space.
Yeah, there's a lot of resistance to that in our science-minded profession. And I do sometimes wonder if we should try and be more open to it because that's what people are asking for. But it's hard though because you don't want to sell stuff that's not going to work. But if people they're out there on the internet looking for other stuff because that seems to be the trend in human health. How does the business group, how do they approach this? So
what's really
what are your thoughts around it?
Really important to keep an open mind. And the reason you need to keep an open mind is you're not going to change people when they're really stuck in that paradigm. But what we need to do as a profession, we need to be advocates for our patients. And if they're suffering because they're not being given the appropriate therapies, we need to be advocates for them and stand up and say, look, that's not the best therapy. So if you can come across when people come and talk to you about alternative therapies and say, oh, look, I hear you, that's fine, and show some knowledge behind it as well. You're just not just parking it off to the side and respecting the client's opinion, but then saying, yeah, look, that's okay, but do you know that this works 50 times better or this will work much quicker and your dog's really in pain and we need to do this. That's where I find a lot of times people will come to me wanting acupuncture for first opinion based on osteoarthritis. And I'll say, we really need to work your dog up first. And then I know I'm doing the right thing by the pet. So they get a full orthopaedic workup and then we give them our normal multimodal approach rather than treating the acupuncture straight up per se. I'm not saying that's the wrong way to go. It's just the way that I handle these things.
Mm. No, and I think the fact that you have knowledge about that stuff gives you more authority to talk about it. Whereas what I often do and what I think what we often do is we're just resistant. Just go, look, I don't even talk about it. This is if that's the stuff you're into, then you're at the wrong place. We do it this way. Whereas you can say with some authority because you have the knowledge about it, yeah, that's cool, I understand, but here's the other side of the story. And they're probably more likely to listen to you because of that.
Totally. What a luxury that is, huh? It's great.
Okay. I think let's start wrapping up. I've got a couple more if you're okay to keep going. So you're a vet, you're a business owner, you're an acupuncturist of some sort, and even your media career was animal centered. If Michael wasn't a veterinarian, what else would you have done with your life?
What a question. It's a really hard question, isn't it? Because I do this and I love this. And as I said, vet is the greatest profession that there is. But what would I do? I'm very risk averse and might sound...
Oh, really?
Yeah, I know. I can
say businesses.
I'm really risk averse. And that goes back to the 80-20 principle, right? I get that 20% right so I don't make those bad mistakes, what you're talking about before on, bad decisions, right? So I'm really risk averse. So I had the opportunity when I was a kid to play sport professionally, and I turned it down because of the unknown. So I probably would have done something like dentistry, where you go into uni and you come out at the other end with an actual degree that you then do a job that has a defined career path. And I would do something like that. Even law would be a bit hard for me because I don't really understand what the direct career path is, but I do and I like science. So look, it probably something as not as boring as dentistry. I've got great mates who are dentists, right? Just something as simple as that, let's say, Yeah, because I'm risk averse.
My eldest son, for some reason, says he wants to be a dentist. I'm like, yeah, I'm fine with that. That's safe exactly for that reason. You'll be all right if you're a dentist. Michael, we've mentioned a couple of books. Do you listen to podcasts at all?
Look, I'm not a big podcast listener, and the reason is I have a real problem with quietening my mind. It goes 24/7. I've got a notepad next to my bedside table that I'll wake up and I'll think of stuff and I'll write it down, and I just can't stop my mind from thinking of 1,000 million things. And so I find anytime I'm in the car, I tend to either have nothing on at all, no music or anything, which is, I assume, where most people listen to their podcasts. I do actually listen to your podcast. I don't listen to the clinical stuff, right? I listen to the other stuff because I really like trying to find out what makes people tick. And I think you do that quite well. So I'm not a big podcast listener because of that problem I have.
Yeah, fair enough. I'm an obsessive podcast listener, and I do sometimes think there's a price you pay for that, is that lack of just mental. I think probably listen to stuff for the same reason that you say, is that the quiet mind, because if I don't have something to focus on, then my mind's going about the here and there and there, and I sometimes find that quite exhausting, really, because there's all this driving along and I've got, I should do that, or I'd like to do that, or here's another idea. And sometimes it's nice to just go, well, I'll listen to somebody else's thoughts for a little bit for personal curiosity. So if that's how your mind works as well, what are you thinking about? Is it to-do lists or new ideas, or where does your mind go, and how do you stop it from being exhausting? Because I find it exhausting sometimes.
My mind goes in every which way direction, often all times at once. It might be the current issue that's urgent and important at work. It might be how I'm going to get my next project off the ground. I'm very, very keen on extreme poverty overseas and helping to alleviate that. And also we do a bit of work in the domestic violence space. So I'm always thinking about how I can get traction for that. I quietened down. I fell into a bit of a trap of drinking too much for a while, because that quietens your mind. And I know that's a problem in the profession. So I haven't had a drink for 3 years. But I do lots more mindful things. I think I alluded to that early on, with my golf and my bouldering and that sort of stuff. And swim in the ocean. I'm not a good meditator. I know it's seriously good for you, but I just find that a real challenge. I'm lucky to make 3 or 4 minutes.
Did you give it a try?
Oh, yeah. Good hard crack. Yeah, it just doesn't gel with me. And then I think it was Gordon Parker, actually, back to that guy who wrote the Burnout book. I think he actually said in his book that golf is a form of mindfulness. And I thought, yahoo.
So it's an active mindfulness more than a sit and practice mindfulness for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then the next practical question, when you have all these ideas, what's your system for filtering all those ideas into the the 20% that matters? Do you write stuff? You said you've got an iPad next to the bed. So have you got a to-do list and then you pick out of that what to do? Or, and again, this is purely selfish asking.
No, that's right. That's exactly how it works. And I'll investigate them a little bit, along the way, and then I'll let them get into my subconscious and permeate for a while. And then, the universe conspires and I might meet someone who's in that field and I'll end up heading down that way. So I've always got a lot of things percolating away, seeing if there's any substance to them. And that's okay. I realise that that's a good thing. But then I get seriously passionate about a few things and I go, all right, I'm just going to have to ditch the other 80%. I'm just going to just laser onto these guys.
I could have a whole conversation just about that because that's a big issue again. Because the more you do, the more opportunities pop up and the more you can do, and you've got to say no to things.
Well, I'm going to do my Australian Institute of Company Directors graduate program because I think my next stage of professional career will be taking the exposure I've had to the animal health industry, but maybe translated into a bigger, broader sense at a top level. So I'm interested to see how that pans out.
As in, you want to teach, or are you going to do a course to learn more?
Going in, doing the course. It gives you a specific skill set then to be able to operate at a higher level.
All right. So, not a big podcast listener. We touched on a couple of books from the old days, recent books that have changed the way that you think about life.
A great book, Simon Sinek, Finding Your Why. Do you know that one?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's a mind blower, right? And so when you find why you do what you do, the sky's the limit, right? And this is this work we're doing overseas in extreme poverty. And there's a great book called Half the Sky by Christoph. And, we can really make a difference. This is practicing in an eternal state of gratitude, right? We can really make a difference to the world and people by doing really simple things, And that's one of my big passions. It's going to find some traction over the next few years. And just briefly, two things actively on that, if I can just do a little plug. One is just dump a little bit of money in a microfinance organisation like kiva.org. They lend out money to micro businesses and the people pay you back. And the other is sponsor a kid, preferably, it sounds terrible, but preferably a young girl. We do through an organisation called Compassion, because there's a direct correlation with reduction in poverty when young girls are educated.
I will put those links in the show description. Thank you for sharing those. So The Why, I loved that book as well. I listened to it, and it's Simon himself reading it, which is really lovely. What's your why? Did you discover the why? Because he wants you to do it really succinctly, doesn't he?
Yeah. I've just lived such a blessed life. There was a media company who invested a lot of money in me at one stage and put me through this program where an external group found my why. One of them really was, I thought, they wanted one on a pet industry basis one, and it was that I think everybody should own a pet. So that was nice and reassuring. The other was, though, that one of my whys is financial independence. Now, that sounds really weird in the context of what I've just been talking about. But if you drill that down, and it came from the fact that we were almost put in foster homes when we were kids and just had nothing. And I never wanted to go there again. And so that translates to the charitable work we do, because I'm in a position now where, we can help alleviate that for other people, right? And I think there's a real sense of responsibility that we should be doing that. We've got too much in Australia. We're too wealthy, We have a responsibility to help others. But this is back to the start again. I've got the luxury of these opinions, right, from where I am in my professional career. Very fortunate.
I had this discussion the other day with another guest. It seems that the trajectory is almost, I don't want to say selfish, but self-focused to get yourself to the point in your career where you can start thinking bigger. So basically, you've got to make sure your own needs are met financially to some degree. And often then people will go, okay, well, I don't have to worry about where my meal's going to come from. And now I can start looking beyond that. Was that your journey, or have you always been in a position where you try to take care of others as well, or look bigger beyond just making the next dollar?
Sure. Two things there. One is Nigel Marsh. I don't know if you've heard of him. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah, he's been on the podcast as
Oh,
well.
does he? No, he's just
Yeah.
genius. He's just written a new book. It's not as good as his other ones, but he talks about these 3 trimesters of your life. The first one, first 30 years, family, career, getting everything sorted. The next one's your professional career. And then, when you hit 60, then you can do that sort of stuff, right? And I think that's totally true. But I don't think that's an excuse for not doing something today, right? If it's going to be, it's up to me. And if not, who? If not me, then who, right? So you can still do something, albeit as small as volunteering for pets in the park or whatever floats your boat in whatever area. I don't think, it's just that as I said, I've got the luxury of operating on a bigger level now, but we do all have a responsibility.
Before we wrap up with the last question, I warned you about the new thing I want to try, and I'm stealing this from another podcast where they actually, I'm going to have to send you a podcast link. It was a podcast I listened to that Simon Sinek was the guest, which is a really, really good podcast. And they finished their podcast with, you need to give me a question that I'm going to ask of my next guest, but we don't know who the next guest is going to be.
Yeah. And thanks for you gave me the heads up on that, and thanks for that, because I thought a lot about it, right? And I had a whole heap of them, but I've come down to one, right? Now, I told you that I'm really interested. What happens is when people lecture or you hear them on a podcast or you go to a conference, I want to know why they're telling me that piece of advice. What's behind that? Because otherwise it's just a to-do list, right? Put your injection fee up, open earlier, be kind to yourself, right? Why? Who are you, right? So I reckon a question that I think would be appropriate would be, describe to me your typical Sunday. Now, the reason I've said that is you're going to get a real insight into that human being, right? That's your personal time. A lot of people work Saturdays, or they're, depending on stage of life, they're running around with kids at sports fields. But Sunday comes along. What is it? What do you do? Right? You might be the president of something, or the halfback for some football team, but what does your Sunday look like? So I just think that's a bit interesting.
That's a really good question. I like that. Now, am I allowed to cheat and ask that question of you? Can I ask you your own question?
No, I'm going to do.
Okay. I'm going to have to wait for the next
it was
person.
for the next guy. Right?
I know. Oh, gold. I like that. So what we'll do with this one then is they'll answer your question, and they'll have to give me the question for the next guest. All right. So the last question. You're doing a talk, and it's not just Japan, it's the whole world, all the veterinary new grads of the whole world, and you have a couple of minutes to give them one bit of advice. What's your advice?
Yeah, and look, I've had the benefit of listening to your podcast and hearing people's wise words, which have just been fantastic. Mine is back to a couple of things I said. New grads, congratulations, you're in the best profession on the planet. It's a gift, treat it as such, right? And on that level, you're not the best and you're not the worst. So be really, really kind to yourself. And that would be it. And hopefully I drop the mic and walk off the stage.
Okay. I'll cut the podcast there. Boof with them. Oh, Michael, this is magic. Thank you so much for your time. And I want to say thank you for all the stuff that you do. You say that. Sometimes I say that without thinking, especially this last couple of things you mentioned there, beyond just our vet world, thinking bigger. Thank you for sharing it, and thank you for doing it. It's magic.
Yeah, good on you, Hughes. It's been a privilege and a pleasure. Thank you.
Before you run away, a quick update on our clinical podcast series and what's in store for our subscribers. I told you about the conference, but I haven't mentioned the details of the clinical content. We recorded Prof. David Church and Prof. Jill Madison's talks on complicated diabetes, some amazing breakthroughs in thinking about and managing Cushing's disease that will change the way I approach these cases, some epic case studies, an approach to the jaundiced cat, a beautiful explanation of all things calcium, and a session on that sneaky bastard of a disease, Addison's. We'll be getting these out to our subscribers over the next few months, including the show notes, which will be the most up-to-date and practical guide on these topics that you'll find anywhere. And of course, there's still more than 100 hours of previous content that you can dig into. Go check it out at vvn.supercast.com. That's VVN for Vet Vault Nerds. or email us at vetweldpodcast@gmail.com about our practice subscriptions, because it sucks to be the only one in the practice who shit out with their knowledge. Unless, of course, you like that feeling of being the smartest vet in the room.